Hey there. So today we're going on a deep dive. We're going to be exploring some fascinating ideas about stories, perception, and the human condition.
Sounds deep.
Yeah, it is. All this is sparked by a lecture from Jordan B Peterson on his We Who Wrestle with God tour.
Ah, okay.
You provided this lecture to us.
I did?
It seems like you're really interested in how these big ideas can be applied to, like, everyday life.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to think of stories as just like, entertainment. But what we're going to uncover here is that they're way more profound.
Okay.
They're like these hidden operating systems running in the background of our minds and influencing how we see, like, literally everything.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
So Peterson, he talks about how we can't just rely on facts to navigate life.
Mm-hmm.
There are just too many facts, and they don't inherently give us direction or purpose.
That's true. Yeah, it's like trying to put together this huge puzzle without the picture on the box.
Oh, I see.
You have all these pieces, but no idea what the final image is even supposed to be.
Oh, so how do stories help us with that? Like,
Yeah.
how do they give us that image?
Well, stories provide the framework, the context,
Okay.
They help us organize information, make sense of chaos, and then figure out what's truly important.
Okay.
Peterson uses this example of being in a crowded restaurant.
Oh, yeah?
There's so much sensory input coming at you, right?
Right.
Sights, sounds, smells, you name it. But you don't, like, totally freak out and get overwhelmed.
Hopefully not.
Right. Because your focus filters out all that noise and allows you to just zero in on the conversation with your date or whoever you're with.
Yeah, that's so true. I never really thought about it like that before. But how does this connect to the power of stories? I'm not quite seeing the connection yet.
So think about it this way. Your aim in that restaurant scenario is shaped by a story that you're telling yourself, right?
Hmm?
The story of a, like, romantic dinner, catching up with a friend, or, maybe a business meeting, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That story determines what information you prioritize and how you interpret everything that's happening around you.
Right, so the context.
Exactly.
Okay, so like our internal narratives, the stories we believe about ourselves and the world, they're kind of shaping our experiences all the time.
All the time, yeah. And this is where Peterson's insights get really, really interesting.
Right.
He argues that the stories we find most compelling actually reveal a lot about our deepest values and motivations.
Really? So the kinds of movies I like, the books I read, even the gossip I listen to, it can all tell me something about myself.
It can, yeah. It's like holding up this mirror to your subconscious.
That's a bit scary.
Maybe a little. It's also incredibly insightful, revealing those hidden beliefs and desires that actually drive your actions.
Wow, okay. I'm definitely paying more attention to my Netflix queue now.
Yeah.
But Peterson doesn't just talk about stories as personal narratives. He also dives into these big, like, overarching narratives that shape entire cultures, right?
Right. He highlights two dominant narratives in Western culture that he thinks are worth examining closely.
Right. Wait.
The narratives of power and sex.
Power and sex. Those are pretty big topics.
They are. And Peterson argues that both, while important, can offer a very limited and potentially dangerous view of human purpose when they become the dominant narratives in a society.
Okay, I can see how that could be problematic. Can you give me, like, an example?
Yeah, sure. Imagine a society that's solely focused on power,
Okay.
where everything is about competition, dominance, and control.
Oh, wow.
It could very easily lead to tyranny and oppression, where individuals are just sacrificed for the sake of the collective.
That sounds a bit dystopian. What about the other narrative, the one focused on sex?
Well, if a society places too much emphasis on pleasure and self-gratification,
Okay.
it risks becoming shallow and nihilistic, lacking a sense of deeper meaning or purpose. Think about the Roman Empire before its fall.
Mhm.
It's often characterized by decadence and a loss of traditional values.
Right.
So...
So what Peterson is saying is that these narratives, while appealing in some ways, don't tell the whole story.
Exactly, yeah. He suggests that both power and sex are important aspects of human experience, but neither one should be elevated to the ultimate source of meaning or purpose.
So where does he go from there? What does he propose as a more balanced alternative?
This is where Peterson brings in the Bible.
The Bible.
Not necessarily as a religious text,
Okay.
but as a collection of stories that offer a more nuanced and multidimensional understanding of the human condition.
Okay. I'm not sure I see the connection yet.
Think of it this way. The Bible, despite its many interpretations, grapples with some of the deepest questions humanity has ever faced.
Oh.
Good versus evil, suffering and redemption. the meaning of life, you know?
Hmm.
And it explores these questions through a complex tapestry of characters and narratives, highlighting the multifaceted nature of human motivation.
Okay, that makes sense. So instead of simplifying human experience down to a single drive,
Yeah.
the Bible offers a more holistic perspective.
Exactly, yeah. And a great example of this is found right at the beginning
Oh, where?
with the two creation stories in Genesis.
Wait, two creation stories? I thought there was only one.
There are actually two distinct creation stories,
Wow.
presented one after the other. And while they might seem contradictory at first glance, Peterson argues that they actually offer a more comprehensive understanding of creation when considered together.
That's fascinating. So it's like each story adds another layer of meaning, challenging us to think more deeply about our place in the world.
Exactly, yeah. It's not about taking these stories literally, but about extracting the deeper meaning and applying it to our own lives.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these ancient stories might still be relevant today, but how do they connect to this idea of stories shaping our perception and influencing our actions?
Well, let's take a closer look at one of the most famous stories in the Bible,
Yeah.
the story of Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Peterson uses this story to highlight the danger of going it alone, of thinking we know better than the established order.
The Adam and Eve story, that's
Yeah.
the forbidden fruit and the serpent, right?
Exactly.
Huh.
And Peterson interprets this story not just as a historical account, but as a profound psychological and spiritual allegory.
Okay.
He sees it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride
Okay.
and the human tendency to overreach.
Okay, this is getting really interesting. So instead of just seeing it as a story about, like, disobeying God, we can see it as a story about something deeper.
Exactly. Think about it this way. The act of eating from the tree of knowledge represents a rejection of divinely ordained limits,
Okay.
a presumption to define good and evil for oneself.
So it's not just about breaking a rule. It's about something more fundamental, like a rebellion against a higher order.
Precisely. And Peterson connects this to the modern world,
Okay.
suggesting that we too are grappling with questions of authority, morality, and the limits of individual freedom.
So you're saying that even though it's an ancient story, it still has something to teach us about the challenges we face today.
Absolutely. The questions it raises about the nature of good and evil, the power of knowledge, and the consequences of our choices are timeless.
Wow. I'm really starting to see the depth and complexity here.
Yeah.
But I'm also a little confused.
Okay.
What exactly is the established order that Adam and Eve rebelled against?
That's a great question.
Is it God or...
And it leads us into this fascinating concept of the walled garden that Peterson uses to describe the pre-fall world of Adam and Eve. So this walled garden, it's more like a metaphor, right?
Okay, yeah, go on.
It's a metaphor for that state of innocence and order, before the fall,
Okay, yeah.
where humanity was like in perfect harmony
Yeah.
with God, with nature, with themselves, like totally aligned.
Oh, I see.
Think of it like, like a child's playpen.
Oh.
A safe, nurturing environment, but with clear boundaries.
So the walls are actually, like, protective?
Yes. They provide structure and support.
Starting to get it. So they represent those, like, natural laws,
Mm-hmm.
moral principles, social structures
All of that.
that create the framework for human flourishing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so when Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, they're essentially breaking out of this walled garden,
Right.
rejecting the safety and order it provided.
Precisely. And the consequences are pretty major, right?
Yeah, they get kicked out.
They're cast out of Eden, condemned to a life of toil and suffering.
Yeah, it's like they traded paradise for the freedom to make their own rules, but in doing so, they lost something really essential.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
So it's not about staying trapped in the playpen forever,
No.
but it's about recognizing the value of boundaries and
Right.
structure.
Exactly, yeah. Peterson argues that those walls, those limits, aren't there to oppress us, but to protect us, to guide us towards a life of meaning and purpose.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm starting to see how this connects to the power of stories. The stories we choose to believe, the narratives that we embrace, they can either create a sense of order and meaning in our lives or lead us astray.
Precisely. And that brings us to another fascinating concept that Peterson explores,
Ah.
the idea of the logos.
Logos. What does
Yeah.
that even mean? It sounds pretty academic.
Think of logos as the underlying principle of order and rationality that governs the universe.
Okay.
It's often translated as word, but it encompasses much more than just language.
So it's bigger than just words.
Oh, yeah, much bigger. It's the creative force
Okay.
that brings order out of chaos. It's
Right.
that divine reason that structures reality.
Mm-hmm.
Peterson connects this to the creation story in Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
You know how God speaks the world into existence?
If there be light, right.
Exactly. That's the power of the logos in action.
Wow.
It's that force that brings form and structure to the void.
All right.
But what's really fascinating is Peterson suggests that this creative power isn't limited to like the divine. We, as human beings, also participate in this process.
Wait, so you're saying we have like this godlike power to shape reality?
Well, maybe not godlike, but we definitely have a creative spark within us.
Okay.
Through our thoughts, words, and actions, we're constantly shaping our own reality.
So we are influencing the world around us.
We are.
Okay, that's a pretty empowering thought,
It is.
but also a little daunting. If we have that much power, how do we make sure we're using it for good?
That's where things get really interesting. Peterson talks about how this power of the logos can be used for both creative and destructive purposes. Remember the Adam and Eve story?
Yes.
They misused this power
When they ate the fruit.
when they tried to define good and evil for themselves.
So it's not just about having the power, it's about using it wisely.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where the importance of aligning ourselves with truth, beauty, and goodness comes in.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we make sure we're on the right track?
Peterson emphasizes the importance of paying attention to the stories we're telling ourselves. Okay.
And the stories we're consuming.
Right, because we talked earlier about how stories shape our perceptions and influence our actions.
Precisely. So we need to be more discerning about the narratives we're allowing into our minds.
Okay.
Are they stories that uplift and inspire us? Or are these stories that just kind of drag us down into negativity and despair?
It's like choosing a healthy diet for our minds, feeding ourselves with stories that nourish our souls, you know?
I love that analogy. It's not just about avoiding the negative stories. It's also about actively seeking out stories that embody those virtues.
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
You got it.
But how do we find those stories?
That's the question.
And how do we know if they're truly aligned with these higher values?
Well, that's where discernment comes in. And this is where Peterson suggests turning to the wisdom of the ancients.
You mean those ancient myths and religious texts we were talking about before? Exactly. These stories, passed down through generations, they have stood the test of time for a reason. They contain profound insights into human nature, the nature of reality, and the challenges that we face on the path to self-realization.
So it's not about blindly accepting dogma, but about extracting the wisdom and applying it to our own lives.
Exactly. And this is where Peterson's insights about the logos become so relevant. When we engage with these stories, we're not just being entertained, we're connecting with something deeper, something that speaks to our souls and guides us towards truth, beauty, and goodness.
It's like those stories are activating the logos within us,
Yeah.
helping us align ourselves with that higher principle of order and meaning.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And when we do that, when we align ourselves with the logos, we tap into a source of power and creativity that can transform our lives and the world around us.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here,
Good.
but I still have a question. Peterson talks about how the logos can be misused, right? Like with Adam and Eve.
Absolutely. He highlights how their story is ultimately a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the misuse of this creative power.
Right. They eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
Which Peterson interprets as like a symbolic representation of claiming the right to define good and evil for themselves.
Right.
They're essentially trying to usurp the power of the logos.
Exactly. It's the ultimate act of hubris, and it has devastating consequences.
So they disrupt the natural order and chaos ensues. But how does this relate to our lives today?
Well, Peterson draws a parallel to the modern world,
Okay.
suggesting that we're facing a similar crisis.
Yeah.
We've become increasingly skeptical of traditional values and moral codes, and in some cases, we've embraced a kind of radical individualism that elevates personal preference above all else.
So we're in danger of falling into the same trap as Adam and Eve,
We are.
thinking we can define our own reality without consequences.
That's the risk, yeah. And Peterson argues that this can lead to a kind of nihilistic despair where meaning and purpose become elusive and life feels increasingly chaotic and uncertain.
It's like we've lost our compass and are wandering aimlessly in a world without direction.
That's a powerful image. And it's why Peterson advocates for a return to the wisdom of the ancients, to those timeless stories that have guided humanity for centuries.
So it's not about blindly accepting dogma, but about rediscovering the enduring truths that these stories contain.
Precisely. And these truths, as Peterson explains, are not just abstract concepts. They have practical implications for how we live our lives, how we relate to others, and how we find meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel chaotic and meaningless.
It's like those stories offer us a way back to the walled garden. Not literally, of course,
Right.
but in a metaphorical sense. They offer a way to find order and meaning amidst the chaos.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And as we continue our exploration, we'll delve deeper into these practical implications, uncovering the wisdom these ancient stories offer for navigating the challenges of modern life.
Okay, I'm ready for more. We've talked about the dangers of pride
Right.
and the potential for chaos when we misuse the logos. But what about the positive side?
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like to actually use this power for good? So we've talked about like all the potential pitfalls of the logos, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about the other side of that coin? How can we use this power like constructively?
That's where things get really exciting. Peterson suggests that using the logos for good, well, it means aligning ourselves with those core principles, truth, beauty, and goodness.
But how do we actually do that? Like those are pretty big concepts.
Yeah, you're right, they are. It's not enough to just think about them abstractly. We need to embody them,
Okay.
make them like real in our lives. Think of it like learning a musical instrument.
Oh,
You
okay.
can read all the books and watch all the tutorials you want,
Right.
but until you actually pick up the instrument and practice, those concepts, they just remain theoretical.
So it's about taking action, putting these ideas into practice.
Exactly. Peterson argues that this is where the real work begins.
Okay.
It's about developing our character, our competence, our capacity for good. Remember, even in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had work to do.
Oh, yeah.
Paradise, it wasn't about like passive bliss.
Right.
It was about active engagement with creation.
So even in a perfect world, there's still a need for growth and striving.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's part of what makes us human, this constant drive to learn, evolve, and become more than we are.
Mm.
And that process inevitably involves challenges, setbacks, and the opportunity to learn from our mistakes.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That's the spirit. But it's not just about resilience.
Okay, what else?
It's about developing wisdom, compassion, and the ability to navigate the complexities of life with grace and skill.
Okay, so how do we cultivate those qualities? Are there any specific practices or habits that can help?
One practice Peterson emphasizes is paying close attention to the stories we're telling ourselves
Oh,
and the stories that we're consuming.
right, because we talked earlier about how stories shape our perceptions and influence our actions.
Exactly. We need to become way more aware of the narratives we're letting into our minds. Are they stories that uplift and inspire us? Or are they dragging us down with negativity and cynicism?
Yeah, it's like choosing a healthy diet for our minds,
Yeah.
feeding ourselves with stories that nourish our souls instead of like junk food for the brain.
I love that analogy. And it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff. It's also about actively seeking out stories that embody those virtues.
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
Exactly. Those are the stories that can help us tap into the power of the logos and use it to create a better world.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
Yeah.
From the power of stories to shape our perception, to the idea of the logos, the importance of aligning ourselves with truth, beauty, and goodness. It's been a lot.
Me too. It's been great. And for you listening, I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and a fresh perspective on how these ancient ideas can actually apply to your life today.
Yeah, it's definitely been a real mind expander for me. So remember, everyone, the stories that you choose to believe have the power to shape your reality, so choose wisely. Until next time, keep diving deep.